Alrighty, we're live. Hi.
Ooh. Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our stream tonight. Haven't been on here in a while, but I have a very special guest with me. He is the head of design at Wattpad and also my boss, Andrew Chak. Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
Hey, Han. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. This is, just the vast audience out there is incredible. I'm really enjoying this.
The funny thing is we have like literally no idea. Well, I'm looking at like the control room right now and there's like we're hovering between 3 and 4, but it takes a little while for people to start coming on. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out tonight to talk to me. This is probably like in the middle of dinner time.
Oh, no, I made sure I ate beforehand. I wouldn't want to be a bad guest and be kind of hangry at you during this interview. So
Hilarious. I know. We like to make sure that we're nice and full before talking to people so that we can be on our A game.
Yeah, it's a hierarchy of needs, like food before streaming.
YouTube shows.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, the last chat I did on here was with our team, and how fitting that you are on here now. And so, yeah, I just want to pick your brain a little bit. I know my viewers are really interested in what we do at Wattpad, and now we can kind of take a little sneak peek behind the curtain and talk to the head of design at Wattpad. So what does head of design mean, Andrew? What is it that you do? What is your role at Wattpad?
So my role is to make sure that the practice of experience design is at its full potential within the company. And the way that that's realized, it's about enabling the product experience designers such as yourself, as well as the experienced researchers, to be at their best and to have the practices to make sure that we are delivering value to the company, delivering value to our users, and helping Wattpad to have a competitive advantage when it comes to understanding what our users want and delivering that value to our users.
Awesome. So that means you're super busy, because on top of all of that, Andrew manages a team of, how many of us are there now? 9 of us?
There's 9 of us in total. Yeah.
There's 9 of us, and we all have our own little personalities. But we like to, we refer to Andrew very affectionately as DAD-rew, because he's kind of like the glue that holds our team together, and we love him so. So really appreciate all the work that you do at Wattpad, Andrew, leading our team and leading the practice. So I know for most of my audience who are perhaps newer to the industry, might be a little bit closer to maybe junior product designers or product designers and know the ins and outs of what their week or their day looks like. What does a typical day, I mean, there's no typical day at Wattpad, but what does a day-to-day or a week-to-week look like for the head of design?
One of the words that you used early on was glue. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to glue things together. It's like every week is like a mystery week, right? I don't know what data or what insights I'm going to learn. And it's about stitching it together. So my day-to-day, first of all, is not to get into the minutia of design, but it's to look at the different problems that the designers and researchers are investigating, and seeing what are the patterns and the connection points across our primary working groups, which we call squads, which is our multidisciplinary teams, and looking for like what are the patterns of insights that we're gaining from our users, what are the common problems that need to be solved, how are different groups aligned or not aligned, and looking for opportunities to create that alignment so that we are really focused on user problems that are meaningful and that are going to deliver the greatest value. So there's a lot of time spent, there is things at an individual level, like meeting with the product experience designers and having one-on-ones with them, and unlocking their potential as individuals and connecting them to what is the greater good that we're doing. But then there's also at the leadership level, keeping them informed of the trends when it comes to our users and Wattpad's users and their behaviors, and uncovering the opportunities to more holistically make things better for our users and the community. So there's a lot of synthesis, a lot of like putting things together, collecting different data points. And I think the best thing that I can be doing is to stay curious, and to understand the why behind how people are operating and what our users are doing, and hopefully stitching that together in a simpler way that people can understand and align to.
And what I really appreciate about your leadership is, like, as much as you are the head of design, and you are involved, I think, at the higher level, you don't ever hesitate to help us on an individual level, or like to sit down and like really jam with us. Because I do remember, like, so many times, especially in design feedback, you're never shy to, ask us like really tough questions, or even join in on whiteboarding sessions, not in an like a overbearing way, but more so of like, here's a different way of looking at this, because you have that overarching eagle's eye view of seeing things, that you sort of like help us uncover in our own design. So I really appreciate that you're able to sort of like be at the higher level, but then we're still at this sort of small enough, close-knit team that you are still able to, I mean, you're not in Figma with us designing all the time, but you are, actively involved. When we need you, we can always lean on you to sort of be like, hey, does this make sense? And you're never shy to be like, I don't know, that layout looks a little bit off. It looks like unbalanced on the one side. So I find, like, I love our team for that, because we're at a big enough size where everyone has sort of their contributions and such different views, but then also everyone is able to be so hands-on with designs, such as yourself, even though, you are overlooking the entire design practice at Wattpad.
Well, I think what's really cool about the size of our team, as well, like just the trust that we have in our team. And I mean, I really do love it when you guys call me DAD-rew, because it reminds me of like the family that we are, and how much we really, prize and value one another, especially the input that we give to each other. And, I mean, I came from larger corporate environments where I oversaw like large teams. I've overseen teams that have grown to like about 80 designers, and like user experience professionals collectively. And what I found really fascinating in terms of joining Wattpad was that although I had a smaller design team, the scope of users that we were impacting, the global scale of users, was actually larger than the corporations that I worked at. And so the way I think of it, it's almost like every designer and researcher Wattpad, and collectively, each of you is impacting around 10 million users, right? And so what's really cool is that even though the team is smaller, there is more direct and immediate impact to a user base. And that's one of the things that I enjoy the most, is that our work has such high leverage because we are impacting a global community, and we get the real, we quickly learn whether or not something's working or not. Because we operate at such a scale where we can experiment and learn off of the experiences that we create, because we've got such a great audience to kind of learn from and iterate with.
And I actually, well, like, you saying that puts so much into perspective, because I think when we design on the day-to-day, you can easily get removed from the people that you're designing for. And so for you to put into perspective, like, each of us is responsible for like about 10 million users, because we're averaging around 80 million users monthly, right, Andrew?
Yeah, it's grown since that, especially during the pandemic. There's a lot more users that are coming to us on that, but yeah, definitely more than 80 million.
That is crazy. Oh my gosh. Okay, look, I have to go and talk to the team about that, because I think putting into perspective that number and the number of lives that you're essentially affecting, right, on a day-to-day basis, puts a lot of weight into what you should, into your decision making, I think, and like what eventually makes it into the product and what shouldn't for whichever reasons that we decide. But I think there is that sort of, yeah, that weight to those decisions now. So I'm going to bring that back to the team.
Okay, no pressure.
I know, right? So I mean, it sounds like a pretty awesome title. Like, what do you find the most enjoyable about being either the head of design at Wattpad, or, you know, in your very senior positions at, you know, corporate America, well, corporate Canada, I guess?
Well, I mean, what I always enjoy, I think that the number one thing I enjoy doing is uncovering assumptions, especially my own assumptions. So, and that's through learning from users. We have a hypothesis, we have a potential solution or problem that we think in. And when we show that to users and get their feedback, I love uncovering this, like, whoa, wait a second, I thought the experience was going to be like this, or this is what was valuable to users. And when we find out that it was something else, or that we had made an assumption in that solution that was uncovered through the research and the user feedback, what I get excited about is like, whoa, wait a second, I found out an important assumption that we're making, which was really a blind spot for us. And then when you uncover that blind spot and you're conscious of that blind spot, what's then exciting is, okay, we've got a whole new set of possibilities now, because we thought we couldn't go down this route, or we assumed, we kind of discarded that. Now we've uncovered this new thing. It's like, wow, okay, we've got a lot of great opportunity here to make something better now that we know this thing.
Yeah, I think I call those moments the aha moments, because you kind of go down a road and then you find out something that you're like, oh, like this thing didn't work because of we thought this, or we did it this way, or we misunderstood this thing. And then you get to like an aha, like,
Yeah.
open up, and like you're just like, it makes sense now.
Well, and the thing is, that's fascinating about it is because like when you learn about those assumptions, what you're actually learning about is like you're learning about yourself, and you're learning about how you think. And I was like, oh, I tend to make this assumption. And then like that helps to unblock things in terms of not just what I do at work, it helps me in my own personal life, right? It makes me more aware and conscious of my bias in my decision making or my assumptions in terms of how I think and how I work. And that lets me like unpack things and just, you know, I think that what I love about design, like design can solve everything, right? We can kind of design think our way out of things, right? Just like, you know, you and I were chatting about like, you know, how do we go about editing YouTube videos, and we can design our way out of it by putting timestamps on your videos. And for those that are listening, you can go, Han's going to add timestamps to this for each of the questions, and it'll make it really easy for you to navigate through each of the questions. That way she doesn't have to edit it, but you still get the value of getting to those questions, right? So like just that design thinking in of itself, right? It allows us to really work through problems and make our lives better. So I just love that.
Yeah, I love that, getting to the core value, or like what is the value that is going to be delivered by doing a certain thing, and then, you know, choosing a solution that is like optimal for that particular thing, where it's like you can do a lot more work. Like I can spend, you know, 4 hours editing a 1 hour video by making the perfect cuts, but then I can also go through in 15 minutes and then do the timestamps. Which one would I rather choose? Well, it depends, I guess, on the context, but if it's just for allowing folks to quickly navigate through to, you know, the parts that they are most interested in, then yeah, no brainer, 15 minutes over 4 hours any day.
Absolutely. I mean, and the cool thing about working at Wattpad is because we're working on a product that people love, and we're working on something that is like, the way I like to think about Wattpad is that our job is to be the best part of somebody's day, right? We have users that religiously will use the app every day or every week, and we're usually someone's reward. And where, you know, I've done my work for the day or whatever it is, and now I just want to relax before I go to bed, and we get to be a part of that. And that's a very intimate moment. And people have worked all day to get to that moment, and we get to be a part of that. And so it's really neat to kind of have that, be able to have that positive impact for our readers. And then conversely for writers who are expressing their voice and are able to find an audience for the first time, being a part of that and helping to build them up and discover their talent and grow their talent. That's exciting too.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main things that drew me to Wattpad when we first talked about the role, because I distinctly remember coming in and not thinking that it would be a job interview. It was like, let me understand what Wattpad does. And I remember us talking about the kissing booth, and how the story that a 14-year-old wrote made its way onto Netflix, and how cool, and how we get to change lives. And I think that's really what cemented my love for Wattpad, in that yes, it sounds very trivial, right? We are a storytelling app, but we are essentially changing lives through the programs and the different verticals on which we work. So I think that's pretty dope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then on the flip side, because there's always got to be a flip side just to keep things a little spicy, is what are the not so enjoyable parts of being responsible for the design practice at any company, really?
The not so enjoyable parts is really when people put on those blinders. It's when people can't see those blind spots, or choose to kind of see their own confirmation bias. So it's when people want a particular solution or a particular direction, and aren't able to see how that's a very limited view. So a myopic perspective is probably the thing that would frustrate me the most. And but I have to recognize that in terms of people that I may be collaborating, right? It's really, leadership is about bridging people from where they are to where they need to get to. And it's whether or not, what can be challenging is whether or not people see that where they're going is the wrong direction to begin with. So helping people to see the problem. If people don't see the problem, then there's no need for a solution. There's no need for a change. So that would be the most challenging thing, or the frustrating thing, is if I'm coming across people that don't have that open mindset, or aren't at least curious about, well, why is Andrew disagreeing with me, or why is he proposing a different way? It can be a challenge if they aren't open to seeing that and navigating that.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of like that saying, it's like the first step is admitting that you have, like, not you, but whoever, like, that there is a problem, right? Because I think a lot of folks deny there ever being a problem, wherever, in all aspects of life, I think, because it forces you to have to now face it and then solve it. And so a lot of the times it's easier just to say, like, oh no, like that iteration's fine, let's just ship it because it'll get out the door faster, rather than saying, no, if we ship it, yes, it'll go out the door faster, but it's actually not going to get us repeat business, or it's going to do this, da, da, da. And so I think it's just the easier way out sometimes. And depending on, I think, the different work environments, I know there's different pressures, right? Like in more corporate environments, or especially enterprise environments, there's kind of, I feel like there's a bit more of the top down pressure because there are several layers above. And so everyone's just kind of repeating what their boss is saying. Versus at Wattpad, we are relatively a flat structure. So I would say, even from an individual contributor, to like Alan, our CEO, I think the line of communication is pretty direct. And so I feel like we don't encounter the same problems at Wattpad. Not to say, like, we don't, there's always going to be someone that's going to be like, no, it's fine. We're like,
Yeah.
no, it's not.
Well, when you talk about, like, say, like multiple layers of communication, what can happen is that people focus more on output rather than outcome. And so, at Wattpad, when we are planning our commitments and what we want to deliver, we always want to make sure that we're framing that in terms of an outcome rather than an output. So rather than saying, I'm going to ship X, it's really about, well, what are you trying to achieve with shipping, feature X? It's like, oh, we want to engage our users more. Okay, so let that be the outcome. And then you're going to find out if shipping X or shipping Y is actually going to drive that outcome. Whereas sometimes people can start off with, oh, I think X is a great idea, so let's ship X, right? And that's all they do. Their success metric is just based on shipping X. Whether or not it's effective or not, they have no idea. They just ship the thing, and they can give themselves a pat on the back to do so. And sometimes when things get lost in the translation, there could be some leadership buy-in to, oh, shipping X is a good thing, so that's what we'll do, right? And my first question was, well, why? What was the outcome that we were trying to drive, and are we driving that? And I think of outcomes in terms of like user behaviors, right? Did it change our user behavior or perception in some way? Because that really tells us as to whether or not users are getting value. And as we say in the design team, very much that we are focused on delivering user value sooner. We've also said we want to deliver it sexier as well, right? I mean, that's a bit of an inside joke for us, but it's real, right? But like we do want to deliver something that's really engaging for people.
Yeah, and I like that switch where we now ask like, when is it going to be done? But versus like or at least I do, because you always press on it, is like, well, what is the value that you're looking to deliver? I know we used to really press on like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? But I think we've gotten to at least our design practice mature enough that we are pretty good with kind of dispelling what the true heart of the problem is. But I think sometimes it gets lost in the implementation, or at least the solution discovery, where we're like, yeah, this solves this problem, but then is it like the most effective way to solve the problem? Also, what are we measuring to say that we've done the job of solving said problem? And so I find that really fascinating, that as our design practice matures, we're kind of moving our way through that double diamond. And so now we're more so in the solution and trying to ask ourselves, okay, after this is implemented, how do we know we've done a good job?
Yeah. So I mean, where I've seen us really get more stringent on is, it's not just about delivering feature X. It's like, how is that feature being delivered? Because what we're correlating with now is better defining, okay, if it's delivered this way or that way, right? What impact will it have on the outcome, right? Oh, if we deliver it this way, it'll be a bit more difficult for us to build, but it's going to yield a better outcome. And it's because we better understand what our measure of success is going to be, right? So that the success isn't based on whether or not we ship the feature, it's whether or not users will use the feature, users will adopt it, and it's going to drive the behavior. So we're evaluating experiences more on the behavior as the outcome rather than the availability of the feature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, this is something that I always press on to new designers or designers that are working on the portfolio, is a lot of the times when we're looking at, your portfolio examples or case studies, we're looking for the outcome that you've driven. Because I mean, we can sit here all day designing things, but what did you actually change with your design? Like, and I would say we're pretty good with, accepting people who are honest and saying that they designed a certain thing and it didn't go as planned and what their learnings were. But I think it's measuring what that impact is, whether negative or positive, that we're starting to really, because that is the whole point of design, right? You're solving a problem either effectively or not, and then you pivot, you go back to the drawing board and you try to solve it again using a different angle.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that a lot of designers get into design because they want to make the world better. And making the world better is having impact on people. And so and conversely, we can make lives worse as well. So we have a responsibility over there in terms of understanding what is going to make life better for our users, and what does this need to have in order to fulfill the kind of the essential human need that this is supposed to deliver.
Mm-hmm, totally. I realized I just looked over at the questions and we just answered like 4 of them. So I'm going to speed through some of the rest because I know someone in the chat. Thanks for all the comments. By the way, Andrew, we had 16 concurrent viewers. So there's a lot of people out here watching us
Excellent.
talk about design.
I think as soon as we said sexier, it triggered something, It
did, right? The algorithms kind of played into our favor.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat wants to know your background in product design and how did you start? Because you don't have well, it is design related, but you have an engineering degree.
I do have an engineering degree. My background is industrial engineering with a particular focus on human-computer interaction. And back in my day, we would call that user-centered design. Some of it we could call it design thinking now. And really grounded in UX research, but also as a designer, I'm self-taught, and my background in design was primarily print originally. So I designed wedding magazines and a lot of different publications, a lot of desktop publishing back in the day. And then like in the first wave of the web, I learned to be a web designer, and I got a break in being hired at IBM as a media designer, so primarily a web designer. And these are very early in the days. I'm going to date myself, like Netscape and Mosaic browsers and all that stuff. Like we got excited over animated GIFs and table layouts and stuff like that. Real old school type of stuff, but it was like the wild frontier when it came to the web. And what was fortunate for me is like I had this kind of graphic design, print design background. I had this industrial engineering, human computer interaction background. And the way that I got a lucky break is that I was hired by an industrial engineer who worked at IBM, and he understood my user-centered design background coupled with my kind of my print design background was a unique combination. And I know that Han, you've mentioned that there's a number of people that subscribe to your channel are very interested about like their second career or transitioning into design. And to that, it's like you need to leverage your strengths. You need to leverage the strength of your current career and what skills that provides, and also what subject matter expertise that provides. And then if you couple that with your design, like let's say I knew someone that was from an HR background, and she actually went into a boot camp to become a developer. And so when she applied to jobs, originally she just positioned herself as a junior developer out of boot camp. But subsequently I said, well, you should really emphasize the fact that you're from an HR background, because then you can apply to be a developer in HR-oriented type companies, right? So she was recognizing the unique combination of her strengths and then capitalizing on that. So whatever other discipline that you come from, it's kind of like you become multidisciplinary by nature, right? And that's something that you should leverage as an asset.
Yeah, I mention that all the time because I think a lot of times when people do start a second career, they seem to think that their first career, or even like if they're starting on their third career, the previous experience is just now discarded. But actually, if you were to mention that and actually really press on that, there's a lot of inferences that we on the hiring side can make, right? If you just say that you have experience, like even in an office environment, we can auto assume you have experience working on computers, right. You know how to deal with teamwork, you know how to, like there's like a basis of understanding of, things that you can transfer. There's always transferable skills. And so I always mention to folks who are, how do you position your resume? I'm like, you mentioned all of that experience that you do have. Even if you've had, jobs that are not careers per se, there's still transferable skills in any previous working experience.
Yeah, and it's your job to be the translator of that, right? And to recognize what are the skills that are required, that are relevant to the place that you're being considered for, and being the translator to surface those skills and how they add value to what you're doing at that potential organization.
Mm-hmm. Totally. One thing I wanted to ask you was, I know you were sort of with Wattpad and kind of like building out the team at Wattpad, and several of the other organizations you were at previously. What do you look for most when you are building out a team or looking at in potential candidates?
The number one thing is I'm looking for people that are curious enough to find out if they're wrong. So what I mean by that, and really that's in a user-centered kind of context. Are they a designer where they are really servicing the needs of the users that they're designing for? Or are they more interested in being artists where they just want to kind of publish their work, right? So I think of designers with the mindset of that they are in service to an objective, in service to a user. And are they demonstrating that ability to, is their design informed by users, corrected by users, validated by users, valuable to users? Or is it, I designed this because I thought it looked good. And, I am looking for that it's really at the end of it is, are they able to drive those outcomes? Right. So for me, success at Wattpad is you're able to deliver an experience that is going to deliver value to a user such that they want to use it. And, we're here to disrupt how entertainment is created and consumed. And we want to make sure that we are providing a compelling alternative for how users create stories as well as consume stories. And want to make sure that when we're creating those experiences that we're drawing users in. We're ultimately validated by our users. And if that's not like a central through line in terms of how you operate, then you're not going to be a good fit for what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I think that actually rings true for like most organizations, right? Like people are looking for people who are going to go out and look for their, like, always challenge their own biases. Even if they think they have an answer, they'll, ask for more opinions and then really try to back it up with data points. And so I think that advice rings true for all job positions. But speaking of which, so let's say we come across a portfolio. Let's say we're hiring and we come across a portfolio and the portfolio seems to check all those boxes that we talked about in terms of having good case studies that, show the value, show sort of like the trajectory of all the different decision-making points. You're one of the first folks in our interview pipeline who speaks to the potential candidates. And so when someone is talking to the head of design or VP of design, what is it that you're looking for, and what is your modus operandi for these meetings? What is your, like, what are you trying to take out from meeting with these candidates?
So first is checking for that kind of user-centeredness. And then the second is understanding what their motivation is to work specifically for Wattpad or with Wattpad. It's very obvious when someone comes as a candidate, which is basically, I want a job, right? Any place will do. Yeah, I heard you had good Wi-Fi and a nice office, or that doesn't matter anymore. But and it's like versus, oh, I can tell that this person really wanted to work here at Wattpad and is interested in the problems that we have to solve, because we are not your typical company in terms of the problem space that we service. And so if we're not an e-commerce type of app, we're not a banking or transactional type of environment. We're one where people devote their creative energies towards. And so you need to be interested in that and demonstrate how you are going to apply maybe your background in a more, say, traditional vertical. How are you going to translate that to the work that we do at Wattpad? And I'm looking for evidence that that is something that is truly something that you're passionate about, that you're interested in and are curious about. And it becomes very obvious to me if they're just like coming in and saying, I just want a design job and that anywhere will do, then it's like, well, that's not really going to be a good fit. And my modus operandi in terms of part of the reasons why I am one of the first to interview people is because subsequent to that is like, there's a lot of people that would interview after me. And like we have multiple rounds with multiple designers and researchers that are all interviewing for different aspects of it. And that's expensive. And so, I don't want to waste the team's time if that's not going to be a good fit and kind of cut things off if rather than, bringing them through a whole swath of people.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned that you're the first sort of gatekeeper of just, I think, the overall attitude. And I mean, I think passion is an interesting word to use, because sometimes it's like, maybe you're not super passionate about, writings, but you're passionate about being able to help, writers in particular countries kind of rise through the ranks. Maybe you don't really care about Wattpad at all, but that's like, it's like you're married to a problem, or you love solving problems. And I think that's like just like overall passion. You don't have to be passionate about the actual company itself, although that would help a lot. But I think we, at every single stage of interviewing, always look out for that, because you can so tell instantly whether someone is just kind of like flubbing their way through so that they can get a job, which is, I mean, it's okay, but that's not like, I think for us, because we have such a tight knit team, we are very protective of that. And so we want to make sure that whoever we're adding to the team is as passionate as us, or is, as enthused and is as driven to solve problems as much as the rest of us are.
Yeah,
So,
well, because we do spend a lot of time with each other, so we've got to make sure that it's a good fit.
yeah. Okay, so I mean, you've probably seen a lot of interviews by now. Are there any like memorable moments or things that a candidate has ever done that really solidified you're like, at first, and then after you're at the end of this interview, you're like, absolutely sign the offer right now. Like, we need you on the team.
I'll give you a positive and a negative example. So like a positive examples is when they talk about like their portfolio work. Usually, here's a tip. I usually give an open-ended, ask them like to review with me their portfolio. And I'll say to them, okay, so based on what you know about Wattpad, take me through the most relevant case study of your work. And what I'm listening for is like, did they hear what I said? Do they have any sense in terms of what I'm looking for? And are they tailoring the way that they're talking about their work in a way that relates to the problems that I might have, right? And then even conversely, here's another tip. If they don't know what problems are important to me, do they ask me, right? In other words, are they treating me as a user? Are they being user-centered for me to help me make a decision and a hiring evaluation for them? And so those that like understand Wattpad's problem space and what we're trying to do, and that when people are showing their case studies, they say, well, this is an e-commerce site, but it relates to how people discover things, much in the same way that you might target or recommend things to users finding a new book, right? If they're relating it to our problem space, then that's them communicating the narrative in a very relevant way is very powerful, and is an example of something that would make me say, yeah, let's get this person in. On the flip side, there's been, I've had one instance where someone we said no to, and part of the reason, as I could tell the attitude was like, this person could not be corrected. This person could not be wrong. And this person did have the gumption to ask for some feedback afterwards as to why they did not get the job. And I said, okay. I mean, I give them kudos for asking for that. And so I provided some feedback afterwards to this person. And then that person then subsequently refuted my opinion in terms of why I gave them that feedback. And I said, yep, exactly. You had great technical skills, but your attitude is one where you can't be corrected, or you can't accept feedback. You don't have the humility to accept feedback. And then what that tells me is that you don't have the humility to be able to learn. And that's going to stunt your growth, because you already think that you're always right. And when people, it is a cliche where feedback is a gift. However, when someone is giving you feedback, you treat that as being valuable because they care enough to give you that feedback, and it's an opportunity to help you grow. I actually worry about people that don't give me feedback, because that means that they don't care. So someone that is able to receive that feedback, and really what it means is that they can learn, and that means that they can grow. And if you can learn, then you have an amazing superpower where you don't have a limit in terms of your capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, because I really appreciate folks who ask after their interviews for feedback. Like, we don't always get to give direct feedback. Sometimes it, channels through HR. But I always like that, because it tells me that they are looking to grow from their experience. Because obviously, if we said no, there was there was probably a mutual, like, not like things not fitting. And so tips to all of you is it doesn't hurt to ask. You might not always get the feedback because we're sometimes interviewing, dozens of designers at once. So it's really tough to give that catered feedback to each and every person. But it's always worth a try. And in Andrew's probably advice, take it with humility and take it and learn from it, and don't fight him on his
don't disagree with my feedback.
Andrew was always right. Hilarious. And then just to end off our question portion before we maybe take some of the audience questions is any general tips, like top tips for anybody about to go into like a swath of interviews with heads of designs or design teams, or just entering any step into their interview process?
Well, if you can ahead of time know who you're talking to and understand what is their role and what would they be looking for, how are they evaluating a candidate? And let's say you can't figure that out ahead of time, then you ask on day of, right? It's like, okay, what's important to you in this role? What does success look like for you in this role, right? That way, at least you can now ground your responses in the context of what they're looking for.
Yeah, I love that a lot, because when you are interviewing, you're essentially trying to connect your skills and qualities to what the company is looking for, and not just selling like you need me. It's like, are you sure? How do you know we need you? What qualities can you do for us? And I think a lot of folks forget about doing that connection back, and giving the relevant examples and framing their portfolio examples into the narrative of whatever company they're interviewing for. So,
yeah, I think a great way, like just to build off of what you're saying, is instead of saying you need me, it's more of here's how I can help you.
Yeah, here's how I can bring value, because I think that's the end of the day. That's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for a design that's going to add value, and it's not. I think it's not always going back to your previous example, it's not always the designer that is the most technically skilled, or can put a layout together in like 2 hours. It's someone that's wanting to learn and wanting to contribute, and always looking in search for sort of like answers and challenging biases. And so I think that's kind of just like my little words of kind of encouragement for anybody out there that might be like, oh, I'm not super good at this, but like I'm like this. It's like, sometimes I think attitude is much better than, because you can teach skills, right? You can teach someone to use Figma really well, you can teach someone how to prototype, but you can't really force, or at least force, maybe you can try to teach, but you can't really force someone to change their mindset to a growth one, or like a more positive one.
That's right. If it's someone who cannot learn or cannot accept outside feedback, then your growth is going to be stunted. You are basically at your max already. And someone that has the attitude to be able to, like, even like if I were to ever get feedback that I don't agree with, I have to really peel that back and understand what's the kernel of truth behind that. And is there's a blind spot, obviously, that I'm not seeing. And so what can I learn from that? Because then now I can be better next time. And if I don't pay attention to that, I'm just doomed to repeat a bad habit.
Yeah, I think that's what is tough for some people, is that they kind of obsess over that negative or like that constructive feedback, instead of challenging, or instead of kind of like unpacking that and saying, okay, so if that was the feedback, how must I have reacted or acted or done or not done something to contribute to that person giving me that feedback? And so again, I think it's a lot of like design thinking too, where it's like, what is the real problem here?
Well, and actually something I'll build on is like, okay, let's say I've received feedback on something, or let's say I've even received it from like a group of people, right? Maybe in a public setting. I think that, and this is something you and I have chatted about, like we can feel like, oh my gosh, everyone's like thinking that I'm incompetent as a designer and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's like, no, actually, they're not thinking about that at all, right? They're just like, okay, here's your feedback, and if you take it and act upon it, they just say, that's amazing, right? That's a great example for us to follow. And they're not critiquing you on an ongoing basis, right? It really is a way of showing care and investment in you, and it's helping you to just be more impactful and better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think just the vulnerability of even being able to accept that and saying, thank you for that, like truly thank you for that, and not just like saying thank you and then like going behind the scenes and being like cursing them out. I think it really shows, if anybody has experienced this, is like it shows sort of like a maturing of you as a designer, right?
Yeah.
Being able to receive feedback is something like I still have to. I mean, Andrew, I still grapple with that and I'm still working on it, but it's just so valuable after you've received it, because then now you know what to actively work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an amazing gift.
Yeah. Let's see. What are people curious about in the chat? Femke. Hi, Femke. Femke is a designer over at Uber Eats, and she has asked, how much influence does design have on the product roadmap or company priorities?
Okay, great question. The way that we influence company priorities really is about how we elevate our users. And as a scale up, we do think about revenue and how do we meet our financial commitments and our growth targets. And the area in which we can have the greatest influence is that, well, how do we connect user value in service to those revenue targets? So our greatest influence is about aligning how users contribute revenue to our company and uncovering the opportunities that by delivering user value, we are delivering business value. So there's a false dichotomy where people often can kind of think, well, it's a user versus the business and they're opposite. So whereas like, well, we are a business, but we're in the business of delivering value to users. So so our influence is really about aligning to our company goals. And because like when, quite honestly, when we're talking with our business stakeholders, we need to show how that user value, or actually we have to talk about the business value first, and then talk about the user value that needs to be delivered in order to achieve and unlock that business value. So it's very much about being in alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say because of our process of forming OKRs and the way that we've done them for H1, H2, which traditionally before we've only done them on a quarterly basis, we've now introduced them on a half-year basis, I think has really helped, because before we were really kind of like tight on timelines in terms of delivering value in like 3 months or less. And whereas now we have the ability to kind of do a bit more stretch goals based on a 6-month timeline, and not feel super stretched, but then also still have time to reach and strive for something a little bit better or higher or greater or more valuable. Coolios. Let's see here. Simran asks, what is the work environment like there? So I guess we can talk about what it was before and then what it is now, like after COVID.
That's a very relevant framework. So when we were in the office, what was it like? I mean, our office is a beautiful space. It's very casual. It's very homey, is the best way to put it. So very free flowing in terms of people working in different spaces. Our kitchen was like our central hub. And you would see designers, wandering in and out of there all the time, especially like for an impromptu design jam, or okay, everyone just like congregate over here and we'll hang out here and kind of work through these design problems. So lots of whiteboards, lots of collaboration spaces. Yeah, I mean, we would do our stand-ups kind of like in this kind of hallway area that was a very open collaborative space, and we had like a user journey on the wall to figure out which parts of the experience we were touching. So very open, very collaborative. And then now, as we've transitioned in terms of working remotely, the challenge is, okay, how do we kind of keep that collaboration? What I've really been enjoying is looking at, how do we interact differently when we're distributed? How do we enable collaboration, especially asynchronous collaboration? and experimenting with different methods and techniques to be able to outline a problem for people, enable them to contribute their answers and share their insights, and to do so in an open and accessible way, and then enable people to build on top of those. So it's been really fun, like trying different asynchronous methods for collaboration. So like one of the recent things that I did with the team was I did a video introduction to a little kind of work assignment that I asked the team to do. And it's part of it's like, well, you know, I recorded this little video, gave them an overview of what the task was, and experiment with that as an asynchronous way of communicating and collaborating. Because in the beginning, what we tended to do is, well, it was an in-person meeting before, now it's a Zoom or a Google Meet, right? And that's not necessarily the best way to do it. Not everything has to be a meeting. It's kind of like when radio transitioned to television, and television started, people did a lot of radio shows on television, right? So we did collaboration a certain way when we were in person, and we can do different methods when we're in this remote distributed context, especially finding ways where we don't have to be on a Zoom call or a Google Meet all the time, because that in of itself can be quite tiring. On the flip side, I'm really impressed by some of the things that you've been trying, Han, in terms of doing like kind of design jams with other designers, where you'll just get on, you know, a video call, and it's more like you're just working in the background with each other, and it's as if you're sitting beside each other and bouncing off ideas, but then you can be working quietly or separately, and then whenever you need to kind of ping each other, you just kind of do that. So it's really neat. I would encourage people to go, just experiment with different things, right? And try to, again, like take what's the underlying value that you want to get out of that interaction, and then how do you translate that in a distributed context?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think we've adapted much better now towards, I don't know, is this like the later half of a quarantine? But what we had talked about in one of our one-on-ones is Andrew and I had mentioned we essentially copy and pasted what we knew of what work life consisted of, or sorry, work from home consisted of before quarantine. And we just kind of like pasted it into well, I guess during the quarantine, working conditions and environments and expectations. And it's like, well, you kind of, you can't apply it because it's not apples to apples. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot going on in the news. People are at home with their kids. They're at home with their spouses. They're in cramped quarters because some of our coworkers are in condos. Some of us are a little bit luckier to have a little bit more space, but then you, Andrew, you have 3 kids at home who are all being, I guess, homeschooled. And so, you know, you can't be on at all times. You can't be jumping on meetings. It's just physically and emotionally impossible. And so I think we've done a lot better at realizing we have to be able to document things asynchronously so that it can kind of live evergreen, because a lot times our conversations and, you know, updates happen on the fly. It's like, oh, Andrew, yeah, so I just had that conversation with Jess and she said this, and then, you know, everyone's updated. But now it's like, after I have the conversation with Jess, I should probably, you know, post in a public channel or a channel where the relevant people who need to know the decisions or action items that are taken, and post it there. So I think we've adapted really well. But I feel like that's because of our, just like the scale up mentality that we all have, where it's like, okay, how do we do better? Like, okay, let's pivot, let's move, like, and we're just constantly trying to improve the things that weren't working so well.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about our team is that we'll design our interactions, right? We'll evaluate it, right, and say, oh, okay, that didn't work so well. Like, how do we iterate on that? And there is something that's really important about shared communications and making sure that that is visible in the places that it needs to be visible. And you know, because one of the things that I find with like Zoom calls or Google Meets, this is a phrase my boss created, like we have Zoomnesia, right? Like, so when I'm talking to people on Zoom, like I don't remember if I told one person or if I told 10 people that, right? And you know, and it's because you don't have that sense of the audience in the same way that you would in real life, right? And so So we have to just be cognizant of that. The other thing is also is like with video conferencing, you know, you can't assume that everyone is paying attention all the time. Right? That's a massive, false assumption, right? So it's really easy for people to be siloed off, to be working in isolation. And if you don't have the checkpoints to really confirm whether or not someone understood or is aligned, you're at risk for people being divergent. And then you don't find out that they were all divergent until you're trying to ship something or put something together. And so one of the things that I think is really important when you're facilitating things in a distributed context is it's not about checking for alignment, it's checking for misalignment. How do you get input from people to understand what their understanding is of what you talked about, and then recognize that, oh, wait a second, everyone came away with a different understanding of this. And then if you don't even know that, then you don't even know that you're divergent, but you need to have a way to find that out. And then at least you can course correct and account for that, rather than making the assumption, oh, everyone's aligned, no one disagreed. Well, yeah, they weren't even watching you half the time during the video call and didn't hear half of what you said.
Yeah, and I find that we are designing to try to uncover those misalignments because I think a lot of the times we take no dissent as consent, as in if no one says otherwise and we say, is this all good? Then silence means, yeah, things are great. I'm with you on this. But then it's you ship things that are like, wait a second, I wasn't sure that you meant it in this way. And so, yeah, I find myself doing the exact thing that you're talking about in terms of, okay, I said this thing. What did you take away from it? So now I'll like have to repeat back. Like,
yeah.
Are we hearing the same thing? Or I'll say, okay, you said this, but like I'm hearing that we're referring to this. And so a lot of the times that that echoing back and mirroring really helps folks kind of hear out loud what they had just said that they might not have, maybe meant in the same way. And I find taxonomy is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
In this.
Yeah. When you say that word, what do you mean by it? Or what do you think it means? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done exercises now where we do kickoffs and I'll do a glossary. And I'll say, like, you said value. What do you mean by value? Or like, you said spam. We actually have Emma Brooks in the chat. So she says, hi, Andrew.
Hi, Emma.
Saying that in one of our marketing and HQD user comms projects. And I said, like we talk about spam. What do we mean? What are we talking about when we talk about spam? Because I think we all have different ideas of spam, but there could be a very like specific way that we refer to it at Wattpad or in the marketing team that I'm not privy to. And so I find having a shared glossary is really important, because I just realized in our team, we refer to a backlog towards like 7 different things. So people are just using backlogs and people are thinking their version of the backlog, which is not even the same thing. So
yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that you've triggered off there is that in a remote context, you must make things explicit. Everything has to be explicit. There's not the same serendipity that you're going to have when you're in a shared physical space. And it's like even one of the things that we've been doing with designers, especially when designers are, say, if there's multiple designers working on the same squad, is being upfront in terms of understanding roles and expectations and areas of interest, right? And if we don't have those kind of outlined upfront, it's going to be very inefficient for us to bump along a squad or a working group together and find out we actually have conflict or overlaps. And that's just a very slow, painful way to go about doing work. So, the thing is that we have to be much more intentional about being upfront about our expectations, being proactive in our communications, and like you said, repeating back what we understood to make sure that we really have that alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know, again, I feel like we as designers, like we're really good in the design team because we always go back and like mini retro things. And like when I did so I did a cross department collaboration. So there was non-designers, designers, and I decided to host it in Figma. And of course, me as a designer thinking Figma is so easy to use. Everyone should be able to use it. It's a collaborative tool. It turned out to be a dumpster fire. And so I quickly messaged the design team and said, guys, so don't use Figma if you're, working with non-designers. Not to say that they're not capable, but it's just not a mental model that comes, immediate, or like we all have a working understanding of it. And so there's a lot of ramp up to it. And so I find our mini retros really funny because we'll very quickly say like, oh my God, I tried this thing and it didn't work. Don't do it, or like do it better in this way.
Yeah, no, and that was really helpful for us, right? And it helped us to like, because we were looking at Figma, can we repurpose Figma as a collaboration tool, like beyond, doing interface designs? And, it's like, you could stretch it if you did it with designers, all right? But outside of that, it's a little complex to kind of go beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just rounding out the hour now. And I do want to make sure that you get some time to spend with your kids and your family. Just going to end it off with a question that Emma had asked. And I think it's a really nice one to end off today's chat is, what is one of your most favorite projects to date at Wattpad and why?
Oh, one of the most favorite projects at Wattpad. I'll answer one that's been more recent, which is dark mode on Wattpad, and implementing dark mode is really meaningful because of a lot of users were asking for it, and based on what we knew of users, a lot of people like to read at night just before they go to bed. So implementing dark mode was something that's very meaningful to our users. But I also like it because it's about, dark mode forces you to really think systemically about your design. You've got to think about your light colors and your dark colors and how they translate. So there's some technical complexity there in terms of how you translate the design from a light mode to a dark mode. And it also changes how you implement your color scheme. So it's like this interesting problem, which is a blend of design and engineering all coupled together. And however, the most rewarding part of it was seeing the user feedback when dark mode was launched and seeing just how much people appreciated getting dark mode and having that just something that was bundled into their default Wattpad experience was really gratifying. And it's exciting to be able to deliver something that's so meaningful in terms of value for users, and something that was going to just enhance everybody's reading experience and just make reading on Wattpad that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, I know a lot of users that we talk to really love Wattpad. I have mine default dark mode all the time. Did I just say dark pad?
I will not respond to that.
Yes. So I think for my favorite projects, if we're going to talk about on Wattpad, I'm going to talk about accessibility. Andrew and I were sort of like the founding committee for accessibility last year. And I remember us taking so many different detours and wanting to learn and wanting to be sort of like perfect at it. And then this year, we're just like, why are we spending so much time? Or actually, it was probably late last year, right? So we spent 6 months doing the discovery, the research, and we're like, we're spending way too much time talking about it. Why don't we just start doing it and start putting it as a definition of done? And we had George Zamfir come in, who is an accessibility consultant, and he basically introduced to us the fact that, it's going to be a huge mountain to climb, but you're just going to have to climb it like 1 foot at a time. And I'm so glad that, we got to be a part of that, and we are now implementing that as part of our definition of done. So no feature goes out without having the proper accessibility specs. And so I love that we're designing for, everybody, like literally everybody, able-bodied, those who have low vision, or those who are even motor, what is the word I'm looking for, Andrew?
I know like they have a deficiency in their motor skills. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that is probably one of my favorite projects to date. But if we're talking about like at Wattpad, I would have to say Salad Club. And I know, Andrew, you've probably seen us like in the kitchen, but for those of you who don't know, at Wattpad, we have a lot of clubs and, different clubs that you can join. And depending on what the clubs are, the meetup times are different. But for salad club, we would meet up once a week. We would choose a salad. Everybody would bring in, an ingredient to contribute to it. And then we would be the most agile team at Wattpad, i.e., we were not on any one single team. It was people from anywhere in the company, really. And we would just storm together. Everyone would sort of like have a role, and everyone would kind of know what their role is. And then we would assemble these beautiful salads, and then eat it and just really enjoy the food together. Like we actually sat down to eat lunch together. And then afterwards, without any prompting, everybody just kind of worked as this I don't know. I try to, I think it's akin to a beehive where it's just you storm in and then you storm out, and then everything was just as it was before Salad Club sort of spawned onto the kitchen and used up all the plates and the bowls and stuff. And then, yeah, as quick as we were to sort of, assemble all the salads, we were just as quick to clean up. And then at the end, it was just nothing happened. And I just think that's so awesome. That teamwork to me is just chef's kiss.
Yeah. I mean, that's, one of the things that makes us miss the office from that perspective, right? Is that kind of kinship.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. I think I'm going to have to let you go now.
My family can see me again.
I know. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's going to help so many people just to hear your words of wisdom and, even hearing your advice on transitioning into design, and then all of the tidbits and nuggets, golden nuggets of advice that you've shared on the interview process, and then everything else and all that you do at Wattpad. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Bye.
All right, got to do the Zoom wave. Bye. Don't wave.
No.
Okay, bye. See ya.
Bye. See you.